When I first started and doing the 60-80 hour week thing, I didn't pay myself. I didn't think about it. I was like, I gotta just make ends meet. I gotta just start growing the farm. At this point, I've given myself a dollar value per hour of what I think I'm worth, and I try to make sure that my activities meet that, and that there is room in the budget throughout the year to make sure I'm paid that at the end of the year. And we're awfully close, which is a good thing. So it means we're awfully close to that breaking even point. And then, but that's, I don't get a paycheck. I didn't set it up that way. I simply just have in my head what I'm valued at. And then that's our goal, is to make sure we reach that or better in terms of profit.
So you're taking percentage of the profit at the end?
Well, for us, in terms of the actual strict bookkeeping, whatever profit's left is consumed by our family or the farm back into it. So there's no, I'm not getting a paycheck. It's just everything's going in the savings and checking account. And we live off that and work off that and keep it barely there.
Yeah, I'd say yes and no to that same question. Is that it's factored in that we use QuickBooks and we take draws, and that, so that just gets factored into your overall sort of profit and loss statement in the end. But a lot of times when we're speculating on stuff, we used to be like, do we include our own time or not? And we used to at one point we were gonna, I told you we have our employees fill out the sheets and how much approximately they spend on each crop at the end of the day, and we were going to do that for ourselves. But in the end, we didn't want to spend all that time accounting for it. And plus, sometimes you get depressed when you start looking at numbers. Seriously, but you do this because you want to do it, and we've been able to make enough money to sort of string it along, but not to go crazy. And so a lot of times when we're figuring out a project or doing budgeting, we do consider how much time it's going to take us, but we don't add ourselves in as a budget item. To answer your other question, I think if I understood your question right, is you're saying, what about when you offer one store one thing and another something else?
Right. You're doing wholesale, yeah, and you may lower, say your Whole Foods and Sebast are closest you can get. I don't know where the location is, but say hypothetically that there's a Whole Foods and a Oliver's Market in the same location. Mm-hmm. You lower your price for one because you know what, they will purchase that, and this one will purchase at a higher price.
That's the way it works.
Is that, it's business.
It is a factor. It is a factor. And I've had people bust my chops and be like, hey, I saw you're selling this stuff over there for, da-da-da-da. And usually my response is, well, hey, they're buying, 260 pounds a week and you're buying 40. I mean, yeah. There are times where I've lowered prices. I mean, I used to do this between, Whole Foods, one would pressure me, and this is before they changed their system, which Whole Foods changes their system every year. There'd be one store that'd be like, hey, we're only going to do this if you lower your price to 37 a case, but then we'll buy 15 cases. And, I try to keep my prices the same for our Whole Foods with every store, because otherwise you get into some pretty weird discussions and tension. You want to keep it's a relationship. You don't want to just try and make an extra $100 and then lose the account, really, ultimately. But ultimately, there were a couple times where we're not going to lower our price to everyone. We'll do this one time. And you try to be as upfront as possible. You try to, but there's sometimes where I might not do something between a Sebastopol and a Santa Rosa. I'll keep that price the same because they see each other. They come into each other's stores. But if I sell them down to Mill Valley, be like, well, I'll give them a good price because they're buying a lot this time, and I just won't. I'm not going to market it. But now their system kind of avoids that anyway because you do pricing in advance. Although, as they say, you can always sell for lower than the price you set. You just can't sell for more than the price you set. So those kind of opportunities exist. But within a store chain, and if it's Whole Foods, it's really the only one I'm talking about, I try to keep the prices the same for everyone 99% of the time. But if it's Oliver's, and I'm not going to worry about what they think of, what I did over to Whole Foods unless they're going to play the same game, the same volume-wise. Susan?
Just curious on your contract labor and payroll, the percentages, would you say just roughly that goes to labor out of your annual expenses or your revenue?
I want to look, I'd say 40%.
I was going to say a third.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So are you primarily, both of you are primarily on a payroll system as opposed to independent contractors, and you take deductions and you do all that?
The specifications for an independent contractor are so well defined and narrow that unless I have somebody who is a really good known person who does nursery seeding and all I do is seeding, and I want to hire them to seed 30 flats a week, great, but, you know, my seeder guy, he works at Harmony Farm Supply, and he's great, he shows up and he does seeding for me, and
Right.
it's not, it just doesn't fit. It's really hard to get an independent contractor for a farm job,
Understood.
unless you hire someone to do, like, your plowing each year. I need a plow guy to come in and do plowing.
Right.
Great.
Yeah, we,
And you
one
have to
time, we
understand.
did someone as a contractor when we had the farm over in Cape Hay. It made sense at the time, although we did like stress over a little bit, and we had to talk to our accountant about it. Because ultimately, if you hire someone as a contractor, you can, you know, if you get audited and they find out that you're in any way directing them,
Right.
you've violated the spirit of that contractor. If they're a contractor, it means that you say, okay, you're gonna go over at that farm and you're gonna produce vegetables and bring me everything you bring, you know, you grow to me. That's okay. But if you say, hey, you know, make sure to get 20 boxes of melons today and bring them to such and such store, you're beyond the bounds of you've become an employer at that point. So you got to watch out, because there's a lot more regulation of that now. And a couple of years ago, they were going crazy busting small farms
Yep.
for labor violations, and I know some people that took some serious hits. So.
Yes.
Because they have to have their own equipment as well. They
Right.
cannot
They-
use your
right.
equipment, otherwise
Exactly.
they're an employee.
Yeah, it's a real
Yeah, you
challenge.
should pretty much just like ignore that that's even a possibility.
I
If
try
you're hiring
hard.
them to build you a shed, yes, you want them
Right.
as a contractor.
Yeah.
You know, you say, build me a shed and here's the rough specs, but if you want them to like handle your vegetables, I wouldn't
That's an
bother.
employee, yeah.
And we haven't done that for 5 years, and wouldn't do it again.
I tried hard to
We
figure
have
it
time
out.
for just a couple more questions.
Rick,
So this broad net question, go a lot of ways, you've answered some of them already, but what are your top 5 ratios for tracking the performance of your fields when you're in there? Labor costs, specific varieties, production, long-term crop rotation, what are you looking at and what are you tracking? What are some of your favorite ratios for that?
I track the amount of input I need to get that crop to fruition. So some crops require more compost than others. Some crops require broad forking first, others don't. Depends on shallow root, deep root. So how much labor was invested in getting the beds prepped for that crop? How long does the crop stay in the ground? Is it a short rotation crop, is what we call it, or a long rotation crop? And then what am I getting per square foot of bed space in terms of the crop value? You know, cauliflower, 1 head. That's it. And there's a big plant. You do heirloom cauliflower, 24-inch spacing, and you get 1 head. Broccoli, you get 1 head, and you get side shoots, and side shoots, and side shoots, and side shoots, and they just keep coming. You get like 3 or 4 times the weight and side shoots of the original head. So those 2 crops, we always grow cauliflower because you got to have some cauliflower, but boy, it doesn't bring in the money that broccoli does. So I look at the square foot value of the crop. Lettuces, if I can do mini heads at 6-inch spacing, and I can still sell them for $3 a head, versus a full-size head that might get also the same price, $3 or $3.50 a head, and I've got to do 10 to 12-inch spacing. That's a no-brainer. You go for the smaller heads, more compact and probably better flavor too, and look nicer at the market. So figuring out the square foot space and then the investment into it, and then the length of duration in that bed space. Because a bed, you only got 12 months in the year. How many crops can you get in a 12-month cycle? Can you get 1, 2, 5, 6 crops in 12 months? That's what we're aiming for, is getting those 5, 6, 7 crops per 12-month cycle out of a bed space. And you get a lot more value that way. So, because it all comes back to property taxes. I'm paying property taxes, and I got to make sure that property is paying me in terms of what I get out of it.
Right. Yeah, I think I do less than Paul does on that, and part of, like I say, I'm doing less of the farming. Kevin's doing more of the farming. He tracks a few things I'm less focused on, but you know, we do harvest logs. You know, so when things come in, we note how much is coming in on everything, and then at the end of the year, we look at like how productive were the beds, and like I said, to me, the most important thing I'm always looking at is this revenue to labor. So. You know, one thing is figuring out, what's the production, how many beds did we use to do it, and then that becomes really important to doing the crop plan the next year to see how much space we did and how productive were stuff. And we do compare years to years. I mean, tomatoes we were just not getting the production the last couple of years like we have, and so those are numbers we're following carefully. But to me, the most important one is sort of this revenue labor one, like how much are we spending on a crop, and that's why we get them to fill out, you know, we have like 12 categories on our timesheet so people can fill out how much they're spending on each crop, and then we compare that to actual money brought in, you know, and we try to keep track of it. And it's hard to do that, like I say, sometimes you got to make educated guesses about, you know, at a farmer's market, how much did you really bring in on this crop. But to me, those are the most important things. And then, yes, sometimes we will try different spacings, like we grow a lot of spring onions, And we've worked with different densities, and so we'll keep track of that, because we do find as we make them more dense, you think, oh, maybe I'm getting more, but then you find out, oh, they're not being as productive, or they don't look as good, and so we've done some, we do some stuff like that. But at the moment, like with peppers, which is what we do the most of, we kind of found a program we like, so we're not tracking stuff as carefully, because we just know we're going to run that program. It's time to just go with what we're doing.
Yeah, which is nice when you have a crop that you just know works, you know how to make it work. You could not be so conscientious constantly about each parameter of it. You just do it because you know every year. It's
But it takes like 5 years to get there.
It does. It does.
About
And that's
5
a
years
lot of
to
practice and
start
experience.
figuring out, and there's variation, and I think the whole thing's, it's all getting blown out of the water. We've had 3 late years in a row, 3 cool summers. So I know it's global climate change, and one thing that we're seeing here is that we're getting cooler summers, and that might be just where we're going. And so we're trying to account for that. It's hard, like I said, we got a program going. Well, the whole program gets to be in jeopardy when suddenly your tomatoes, this is too marginal for us. Tomatoes aren't putting out like they used to, and there's suddenly some disease issues, and it's like, how do you track that? All you can do is look at the overall production numbers versus beds planted, because our production system's the same.
All right, Elmo's gonna have the last question.
So you guys are tracking labor costs, all of these things, and you just touched on how the climate is changing. Were you in the last 5 years tracking any of that?
Climate change stuff?
Yeah.
Keeping track of it?
You have a stick out in the lower bog that, it was 3 foot, now it's 6 foot over the last 2 years. I mean, does that kind of play into how your crop rotation and, what you're gonna do?
My bigger concern with the climate change, I like the cool weather. We've had great tomato production and pepper production from selecting heirlooms that love that and do well. My bigger concern is the more frequent violent weather events. So there's greater chaos now. The first rain event we had in 2010 was October 23rd, and it was 6 inches of rain in 48 hours. And that was after 5 months of dry season. I mean, that just blasted everything out of the ground. I had neighbor farmers that had 100% crop loss from 6 inches of rain in 48 hours. And that's not supposed to happen. It's supposed to sort of work your way into the rainy season. and God, I think actually what happened that day when that happened was and then it was like dry for 6 weeks after that. 6 inches of rain and then nothing for the next 6 weeks. So it's those hard fluctuations that you need to be much more careful and conscientious about how you farm, so that you can preserve your soil and preserve the health in the farm, and preserve the biodiversity, and have resilience in your crops. That's the bigger challenge for me. And yes, there have been changes.
Do you both have crop insurance?
No.
No, I don't know
No
if
way.
they really offer it for the kind
I
of
don't
stuff
know.
we're doing. That's for like big commodity crops
Yeah.
generally, and
Because they
on a
can't.
much bigger scale.
Yeah, they can't price what we're doing. I mean, it's not. 1,000 acres of corn is very easy to say exactly what you'd be getting out of it. So.
And I'll just say, I know you finished, just to finish that question, with the weather thing, we track it, but we don't have a weather station. I wish we did, we're kind of weather geeks. But we do watch things. There's certain things, like we do measure our rain, although we don't even worry about the cumulative. We're just curious. I think the one thing that we keep an eye on is the nighttime temperatures. Because what's happening is, 10 years ago, the average nighttime temperature was like 55. Now it's like 50. For us, we used to grow a ton of eggplant. We were a big supplier of eggplant. And eggplant needs to be 55 and over. Well, our eggplant production has gone to the point where we only have 1 row left. We used to have like 12 200-foot rows. We did a ton of eggplant. It's just not worth it anymore. So I'd say it's more like anecdotal observations will be more valuable, like noticing like, oh, cold summers. Okay, how, you're doing your crop planning, how am I going to affect that? If we had actual technical data, I don't know that that would affect our decisions at all, but we see the trends and we're responding to those. So it's just having an eye to it. I read the paper every day. I look at Sebastopol's high lows and San Rose's high lows, and that tells me a lot of what I need.
And if you notice, they're calling for a nice heat wave coming in. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, calling for like low 90s in Sebastopol of all things. So my first reaction is, we're going to have frost. And that sounds so backwards, but those heat waves mean that you don't have any nighttime air mass coming in from the ocean as a blanket to keep you at about 48 degrees, and you don't even have any cloud cover or fog. You just simply have the deep space trying to balance out with your soil temperature. They're trying to meet halfway, so it's going halfway to Kelvin, 0 Kelvin. So when we get a 90-degree day, that was when our first frost happened on September 9th, that same day was one of our heat wave days, it was 87 degrees, but we were at 30 that morning in the bottom half of our fields. So you definitely watch the weather. You definitely, every single day, I'm checking weather 3-4 times. I'm watching the satellite, the moving satellite imagery. It's very important to understand why they make the predictions they make so that you can make better predictions for your own piece of land, because theirs are just very generalized.
Go out and harvest before this weather hits, you gotta do a lot of times.
It's like pull every tomato and eggplant you can out of the field and see how long it lasts.
All right, let's hear it for Keith and Paul.